Excelsior, true believers! You are about to embark upon a journey, a trip to the 70s and 80s when mighty Marvel Comics ruled over all. The Defenders, Doctor Strange, the Champions, Deathlock, the Submariner, the Incredible Hulk, Killraven, the Son of Satan, the Macabre Man-Thing, and all your other Bronze Age favorites every week appearing on Defenders Dialogue. Now here are your guides, Christopher Golden and Brian Keene.
Excelsior, true believers.
Excelsior indeed, Marvelites, and welcome back to the final episode, the last issue, as it were, of Defenders Dialogue. I'm Brian Keene.
And I am Christopher Golden. A happy episode 152 to you, Brian. I cannot believe it. It's 152 episodes. I don't know. I don't know how long I thought we'd go, but 152 episodes is quite a run.
It's been a hell of a run. I think we've been doing this 5 years, 152 spread out over like 5 years. Yeah.
I just have to tell you something before we get started and kick off with our guests that we'll mention in a moment. But just because I have to tell you this story, and I think people will be intrigued by it, about a few minutes before 11 o'clock last night, I was sitting watching The Boys, I think.
Right.
And I heard a car horn. Now, I live on you've been to my house. I live on a suburban, dead-end, quiet road, very little traffic.
Right.
So I heard a car horn and then a thump, 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 thump. And I was like, jumped up immediately. It's like, what the hell? I was sure there'd been an accident.
Right.
I looked out my front window. I didn't see anything out there. Opened my front door. Meanwhile, my daughter Lily comes in from the kitchen. She's like, Dad, she's calling for me. I'm like, I'm out here. Why? She says, I think there was an accident. And she said, no, it was a truck. It was a big sort of flatbed truck that went down the street behind our house.
Right.
Oh, okay. And I looked up the street and it's very dark up there. I didn't see anything. Come back in, sit back down. About 20 minutes goes by. And at about quarter after 11 o'clock at night, my doorbell rings, which is very late, obviously.
Right.
So I get up and I go to the door and I'm like trying to look through. I turn on the outdoor. I'm like, who's there? Who is it? Like, this is weird. And I hear a voice sort of mumbling and feeling like it's the beginning of a horror movie. So I turn on the light that's on my front steps and I peer through the window and I see this woman covered in blood standing on my front steps. And I'm like, oh my God, who is it? And I can hear her. She's not even looking. I was in an accident. I was like, oh shit. So I open my door. I go out, no shoes, which is stupid. I go out and talk to her. And basically what happened is just up the road from me. And when I say just up the road, I'm talking like 70 yards
right
up the street. There's an island in the middle of the road. And I don't know if this woman was drinking or on her phone or whatever it is, or had no headlights on. It is very dark in that spot. But somehow, apparently, she hit the island and flipped her fucking car.
Holy shit.
Again, I live on a quiet suburban residential street where you should never be going fast enough to flip your car.
Right.
You especially shouldn't be able to flip your car hitting a curb. So I don't know what happened, but I do know that her car was upside down and she managed to get out of the car. She had a head. Obviously, I immediately called 911. She had a head wound that had bled all over her shirt and face.
Right.
And a big bump on. So she definitely had a head injury of some kind. One flip-flop, like mumbling about she wanted her phone, just very clearly disoriented.
Right.
Anyway, so they came, the EMTs, the police, the fire department, the tow trucks, and all this kind of stuff. I did get something in my foot, which I'm sad about. But yeah, it was a real life version of the beginning of something we would write.
Yeah.
And it was just it felt so surreal to look out through my front door and see this woman standing, like, again, totally disoriented. You could tell she was not focused on anything, and like with blood all over her. And I was like, this is just nuts. So anyway, to celebrate the final episode of Defenders Dialogue, there is my story of the day.
We're gonna get off on a complete tangent now because prepper survivalist Brian is taking over. What do you mean you got something in your foot? What, like broken glass or something?
I don't think it's. I don't know if it's glass, or I don't think it's glass. I think I just have like maybe a pebble or something, or something got in there. But anyway.
You didn't get her blood in your foot, did you?
No, for sure.
Because that's how you get monkeypox.
Yeah, no, it's not blood. It's not monkeypox or Captain Trips.
All right.
But anyway, so I just felt like I had to share that. I thought that you and our listeners would be intrigued.
Yeah, I don't have a story like that for this week. I've just been, hanging out, taking care of my feral kitten colony outside. All of whom have stopped nursing as of today, so they are now going to go out to good homes, and the mom is now tame enough that she'll eat from my hand, and she lets me scritch her. So I'm going to take her to the vet and get her spayed and see if she likes to live indoors.
Cool.
So yeah. So, but yeah, if a bloody person showed up on our front porch, they would have to get past 6 feral cats right now.
I mean, this woman looked like she'd been in a fight with 6 feral cats.
Yeah. Oh man. So, well, folks, as we said, this is the final episode. We would love to keep doing this, but look, you're the listeners, as well as we do. Episodes are getting further and further in between each other. We used to do this like clockwork every Tuesday, and now 3 or 4 weeks might go by before we can get a new episode up.
4.
Yeah. So, but yeah, we've had a good run. I mean, we started with, of course, the Defenders, and then we did Defenders spinoffs such as Gargoyle and Champions, and then we got into other corners of the Marvel Universe, everywhere from Godzilla to Man-Thing to Spider-Woman and Moon Knight, Black Goliath. And during that time, we've had a number of guests on the show. So we brought 4 of those guests back for this final episode. Of course, Scott Edelman and J.M. DeMatteis, both of whom were influences on Chris and myself. And then, of course, our peers, Tom Sniegoski and Cullen Bunn. All 4 of them, of course, have written extensively for Marvel. And, Chris and I have written for Marvel, and we thought we would do something a little bit different and a little bit fun for this finale. So let's go to that now. All right. So now let's get to the main event, Chris. I don't know that these 4 gentlemen need any introduction to anybody who has ever read comic books or who has listened to the previous 151 episodes of this show. But do you want to do the honors?
Well, listen, I'd be happy to, except that most of our listeners have met. I think what's fascinating to me is I doubt that these 4 guys have ever been in a room together.
I don't know. Let's test that theory.
So we have Scott Edelman, Cullen Bunn, Thomas Sniegoski, and J.M. DeMatteis. Did I say it right this time?
You did.
Oh, yes, thank God.
Only took you 152 episodes.
Listen, I'm saying DeMatteis. What do you want me to say?
I've been in a room with all of you, but you just didn't know it. I was.
Wait, come into the room right now, Cullen. Get the fuck away from me.
Well, the creepy part, it was my bedroom. That was what was scary.
Yeah.
Cullen was behind the fern.
I suspect you may all have been in one room at the same time, but it was probably the San Diego convention center where there are 100,000 other people in there as well. Brian, I'm, you wanted to talk today about the projects that we wanted to do at Marvel, perhaps inspired by the love of things from the Bronze Age that we could never get Marvel to greenlight or approve. Tom and I have had various things where we've nibbled at the edges of Marvel things. We've done a few Marvel things over the years, most of which I wish we hadn't done, but that's a whole other ball game. But I want us to start.
That's what I was gonna say, Chris. Is that most of the stuff we were doing it together. That was the
except the occasional my Blade one shot and the 2 Spider-Man Unlimiteds I did with monsters in them. Other than that, I think it was all together. But in any case, so I don't want us to start because we have much more stellar guests here. So.
Well, why don't we start with the veteran in the room, the creator who has had the earliest influence on us, and that is, of course, Scott Edelman. And Scott, you'll appreciate.
Am I the earliest one, really?
I think you are.
I did not realize I was the earliest.
I think Brian's calling you old, Scott.
No.
Is that what it is?
No, but I will point out to him, I was rereading your issues of Bronze Age Captain Marvel yesterday, in fact. And there's one issue, I think it's the issue, I can't remember the issue number, 54 maybe, where the credit box is very crowded by the art. So they only list the last names of the creators. And I went up to Mary and I said, you want to know how much of a badass Scott Edelman was in the 70s? They just listed his last name, written by Edelman. And she bought it. She thought, So.
Which Edelman, who knows? But some Edelman wrote it. I don't know. Well, it makes perfect sense for me to be on the final episode of Defenders Dialogue because it just occurred to me this morning 2 things. One, I was in the final issue of Giant Size Defenders, which was number 5, and that issue of Giant Size Defenders number 5 was my first Marvel Comics credit ever.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
In a July 1975 issue. And speaking of crowded credit boxes, it's one of what I consider a famous credit box because squeezed so many names in there. It was ridiculous. It was plotted by me, Steve Gerber, Jerry Conway, Roger Slifer, Len Wein, and Chris Claremont, and then scripted by Steve Gerber. And it was all done at the Lantern Coffee Shop where a lot of things happened back in the mid-'70s. That's where people went out to dinner, got assignments. People were told, oh, so-and-so is late on a book. You want to do a fill-in or something like that. That's the same place where I got to do an issue of Omega the Unknown when Jim Shooter took a couple of us out and say, okay, someone else has got to do the next 2 issues. So that was my first credit. So there is some poetic justice to being at the end of Defenders Dialogue since Giant Size Defenders number 5 was both the end and the beginning of something.
Yeah, and that issue was packed. That had the original Guardians of the Galaxy. It had one of the weirdest villains, Elar, which was a mutant eel. Was that your idea or was that someone else's?
Well, one of the issues about being the oldest person here or the one with the earliest credit is remembering exactly whose idea was what becomes difficult after all these times. And when we talk about the lost opportunities, often it's the lost opportunities to do what? Who remembers? Because we don't necessarily have all of the plots back then and in the electronic days. So there are some examples where things were given to artists and they vanished and never drew anything and nothing exists and I can't remember. Which always boggled the mind because back then, if anyone remembers back then when the dreaded deadline doom was destroying everybody, one of the things they did to try and catch up, aside from fill-in issues, was let's have the newcomers do 5 or 6 page backups. The main writer and artist of the book would then only have to do a 15-page story, and they would somehow catch up. There were 2 things wrong with that. One is all that meant is the original writer and artist took a break, took a sigh and said, okay, I guess now we can slow down again. So they never actually got out of that. But I got a lot of opportunities with that, a lot of fun stories. But the problem was for answering this question is several of those 5 or 6 page plots were written up, given to people, and never drawn. And I have memos to Archie Goodwin saying, can you nudge these guys? I don't get paid unless they hand it in. So, for example, there was a backup for The Hangman, a little standalone 5 or 6 page story, and there was a backup for The Submariner, a little 5 or 6 page story. What was supposed to happen? I have no idea. But in terms of the few plots I have that did survive, one of which I didn't even realize it still existed, I just found it recently, was the plot for what the next issue of The Scarecrow was supposed to be before the thing was canceled. And, basically it appeared in Dead of Night number 11, and then, it never actually got its own comic book, even though it was supposed to. It was listed in the subscription ads. It even said, and so I don't know how many people ever bothered to subscribe, but part of the great implosion was, the fact that the Scarecrow never got to appear in his own comic. So many of them died. So it really just made those 2.5 appearances, and as to what was supposed to happen, if anyone goes to my blog, they can find that final issue. It was going to end up being drawn by Don Perlin, not the entirety of the issue. Don Perlin, because of scheduling, did a splash page, just sort of a test. What does Don Perlin's Scarecrow look like? And the rest of the issue was going to be done by one of the Filipino artists. That was happening. They were being sent off to the Philippines, like Rico Raval, for that first issue. And though that plot exists, when you say lost opportunities, it's not just a lost opportunity for a single issue. It's a lost opportunity for a whole comic arc. And going back to my memory, not being able to provide what really happened, the next issue blurb on what was supposed to be that missing issue was, next issue, the Scarecrow turns superhero. It was even announced in FOOM as the Scarecrow turned superhero. So basically those first issues were the origin story, how he comes to this dimension, which of those brothers he ends up inhabiting. And in fact, when I reread the plot that I handed in, it actually says, and eventually we're going to explain why the 2 brothers have different last names. I don't remember why the 2 brothers had different last names. And I don't remember why the character was supposed to become a superhero and how he's supposed to then interact with the rest of the world rather than the origin villain and that cult that caused him to be. So though there are a couple of other things that that never came to happen, I would have to say that is the biggest regret, the fact that the Scarecrow never got to have a run, never got to figure out exactly who he was going to be in the Marvel universe. And I guess even the bigger regret is, what the heck was going to happen? I don't know. What kind of superhero is supposed to come? But we announced it in FOOM, so I guess maybe there have been some discussions with the others at the time that we were going to do it. But again, we're talking, this is 1976. So that is now 46 years ago that this was going on, when I was still hanging out in the bullpen. That was like before I left the job, before I went to DC and had unfulfilled pitches there. So I would say I will just leave it at that it would have been nice to have let the Scarecrow have a longer life.
Wow. Now, Cullen, I know in talking to you, we're about the same age, and I know those 2 issues of Dead of Night, and then I think Scarecrow popped up in Marvel Team Up. You dug those. I dug those. Is he one of those characters you always wished you could get your hands on and never did?
Yeah, I mean, Scarecrow's on the list. There's a big list of Marvel characters that were like my bucket list characters that I wanted to do something with at some point. And I remember an editor at one point said, "You've got to stop pitching these characters that can't sell books, Cullen. Stop," because it was just all these characters that I love, the characters that are awesome, and like we can't sell books. So I started incorporating as many as I could into the background of other stories I was working on when I could. But yeah, Scarecrow's definitely on that list.
So what's your I mean, you've done a lot at the House of Ideas, but there's got to be that one huge pitch that you were dying to write that just never got greenlit.
So what's interesting about it is, well, first of all, in my time with Marvel, getting a pitch of your own in was almost impossible. I mean, getting it through over the finish line was, if you came up with a concept and put it out there, it was a fight to the finish if it got made. So like Fearless Defenders, that was my pitch to them, and it took them 2 years to get them to finally greenlight it.
Wow.
As Guardians of the Galaxy was my pitch, and it took them 2 years to finally say, okay, we'll do it because of me badgering them. But it's funny you say, what's the one pitch that you always try to get out there? And it's not one, because I looked it up I looked up my emails to see, because I knew what it was. And I realized I pitched this series 4 different times to Marvel. And that was, I wanted to do, a new take on the Night Stalkers, which was from the 90s, was the series with all the horror characters. I feel like Marvel has never, very rarely in recent years have they gotten the horror characters right. They treat them like a joke. They're funny, and they miss the point. So I looked it up, and I've pitched this series, different variations of the Night Stalkers, 4 times to Marvel. And the team, is always, maybe pertinent to your podcast, it was always a non-team. It was always a team that would come together. And but the team, it looks like I wrote down the team members here of different versions. I had one version that was Punisher, Moon Knight, Blade, Doctor Strange, and Mania, who's a character I always have a character I create in there somewhere. And then there's another version with Ghost Rider, Man-Thing, Werewolf, Morbius, and Satana. And and there's another version with Punisher, Moon Knight, Magic, Hellstrom, Elsa Bloodstone, and Blade. And all of those, I was like, these are great. That's a great lineup for a horror team. And what they would say to me every time I pitched it, you got to stop pitching these characters that can't sell a book. Or they just finally, this last one I called up.
Do it crappy, it would sell. I don't know.
Well, that's what I was saying. It's not selling because you haven't done it right yet. And there were some. I was pretty excited about a couple of these pitches, and I was excited about all of them. But there's one I was just reading about the Darkhold, and the Darkhold proliferating and starting to possess people. It was writing itself across the Marvel universe is what brought these characters together. It would have been a great series, and I always had terrific artists who really were like, if you get this through, let's make it happen. And I feel like during my era, it was the era of 11 issues is considered a huge success. If you get 11 issues, it's a very successful book. And I know I could have gotten 11 issues out of these.
What's really hit me, and the listeners can't see your face, but I think they can probably hear the regret in your voice. I mean, it really hits.
It does. I know it's, I know I don't own these characters, but I feel, and I'm sure, so many creators do, you feel sort of a sense of connection to them and a love for them that I really care about these characters in a lot of ways. And so yeah, I feel like I could have done something interesting with that book, and that's the biggest. I worked on a lot of books for Marvel that I was like, I'm doing it for a paycheck, and because they say that's what they need, and I did my best job, but it wasn't. They weren't characters that I was just in love with, and right. So this is one that this is one of the ones that. We could talk all day about the pitches I sent that never got a response. But yeah, this is one of the ones that really meant a lot to me, and it was kind of been sort of a Dark Defenders in a lot of ways, and it would have been awesome.
Speaking of Dark Defenders,
just solve the problem. Pitch it as Dark Defenders with that title, and they'll buy it.
Well, I think nowadays someone else is going to have to pitch it, and they might buy it.
Well, you know what? I pitched it last year.
Well, there you go.
Something very similar. What's really funny that you mentioned that, because Pat Searcher and I came up with, we both love the supernatural characters. I hear a lot of Echo. Do you guys hear Echo?
Just a little bit, but I don't think.
Okay. Yeah. And we came up with what I thought was a fantastic pitch. And it was Son of Satan and Satana. We created a new Devil Slayer, a group of new other characters, international supernatural characters. And Patch is a fantastic artist. He did some great work. And it was the same thing. This is really good. We don't know what we could possibly do with this.
Yeah.
And this Defenders dialogue. That was the great thing about Defenders back in the day. Writing Defenders was I always wrote the obscure characters because they're the most fun, because you can make them your own and build them out. So but it's funny that you mentioned that, Cullen, because I had a very similar experience with the same group of characters.
Well, and you would think, I mean, some of you look at your body of work, Craven's Last Hunt, the Ben Reilly stuff, the Six-Fingered Hand from the Defenders. I mean, these are timeless stories that people are still reading today. You'd think you would have an easier time getting a pitch through, but I guess that's not the case.
But here's the flip side of that. It's like, I've been doing this for however many years, it's just part of the game, as you guys know. It's like, sometimes you get it over the plate and sometimes you don't. And eventually I found, for me, most of the time, so many projects that I hold on to for years, well, I couldn't sell it to Marvel. I'm going to create my own original characters out of this. And maybe it's 15 years later, I managed to sell that idea. Most of the stuff that I've come up with over the years, I've managed to sell. Sometimes it's taken 20 years. And every once in a while there's something that doesn't. But rejection is part and parcel of the game. It doesn't. I remember years ago reading an article by Ray Bradbury. When it's just like Ray Bradbury written when he was at the height of being Ray Bradbury, and talking about how frustrated he was because he had this story rejected by Playboy. And I figured, if Ray Bradbury's getting rejected, of course I'm going to be rejected. It's like everybody gets rejected when you're a professional writer. The audience doesn't know how often we meet with rejection. All they see is our successes. But there's, we've all got, closets full of rejected pitches that we pull out and we keep revising and working on.
Right.
And it's interesting because
happy to hear. Sorry, just say I'm so happy to hear about your rejections because it makes me feel better because I'm feeling the same way. Like, well, I can't feel bad about them shooting down the pitches that I sent in. I had no track record at Marvel at all. And if they're rejecting you guys, which, by the way, half of the pitches that I had that were rejected used the same characters as well. But now I don't feel bad. But Cullen, you were saying something. I'm sorry.
Well, that goes back to that great Jack Kirby quote that Brian keeps saying. That was a Keith Giffen quote. If they'll fuck Jack Kirby, what do you think they'll do to you? Well, I guess it's sort of the analogy is if they'll reject Ray Bradbury, what do you think they'll do to you?
Right.
Yeah, I told that story on the horror show. I don't know that I ever told it here, but Chris, you'll remember this well. I was part of the team for Future's End at DC, which was going to be their new 52-week-long thing, and for an entire week it was Keith and myself and Brian Azzarello and Greg Rucka and Dan Jurgens, and we're in this room and we're pitching all these things, and every day Rucka would blow me away with these ideas, and it would be a go, and we'd stay up all night, building around that. And the next day Dan Didio would come in and say, oh, well, no, we're not going to do that. Come up with something different. And at the end of the week, they finally give us our contracts for this thing, and I'm getting paid half of what everybody else is getting paid. And I go to Keith, and Keith's like, they fuck Jack Kirby. What do you think they're going to do to you? And Chris, you'll remember, I called you and I'm like, should I walk or should I suck it up and take it? And you said, if you suck it up and take it, then this is what they're going to pay you all the time. And well, I'm paraphrasing, but yeah, so I walked, and I think to this day, Dan holds that against me. I don't think he'd had many creators, particularly new creators like myself, do that. But yeah, Keith has given me a lot of good advice over the years, a lot of funny advice, but that always sticks with me. They fuck Jack Kirby. What do you think they're going to do to you?
Yeah. But I want to say something though. Just the flip side is, a lot of this rejection is not anybody trying to fuck you. They're just having to make a decision and decide what they're going to publish this year and what'll work and what won't. You will run into situations where you're dealing with people who where it's something difficult and they're a difficult person. But most of the time, it's just business as usual, and that's what I learned over the years, that you need a thick skin and a hard head. I always say, you get rejected, crawl under your desk, bang your head against the wall, shake your fist at God, then come back out and write another story. That's what we do.
Yeah.
Well, what I was going to say earlier was, first of all, Chris, I too take great delight in hearing that other writers have been rejected, or when they are rejected. But second, these pitches, this one I was just looking at for Night Stalkers, I can already see bits and pieces I've taken out and used in other stories because they were good ideas that just weren't right for Marvel at the time. But I'm not going to let those good ideas go to waste. And yeah, I can already see bits and pieces I've used in creator-owned stuff, in other licensed stuff, because they were solid concepts.
Yeah. I agreed. Tommy, do you want to chime in?
Well, like I said a little while ago, most of them were with you. So if your memory is as crappy as mine, we're fucked.
No, I just want to rattle off a few things. The last of which is the thing that I want to. So I was actually brought on by editor Evan Skolnick to take over Morbius when Bobby Chase was editing it. And they had done this thing where Morbius had become such a different character. He was like he was basically Plastic Man.
What?
He could like turn himself flat as paper to slide under a door and weird shit. And the character becomes so far away from what Morbius was that it was ridiculous. And Evan hired me to take over Morbius, but I was right in the middle of working on my first script for Morbius, which basically was the classic. By the way, the last like 6 issues, that wasn't Morbius at all. It was this shapeshifter taking his place. And then Morbius was canceled while I was writing that issue. Wow. So I never got to see print. One of the first things I ever pitched when I was in like 1990, I was like 23 years old, was Hellstorm and Blaze. It was a team up book post Ghost Rider, Johnny Blaze. And I described him as, like still wearing his old uniform, but sort of in an Old West way, with like his knee was wrecked from the bike. So he had a brace on his knee, and he had a shotgun that shot hellfire. And in issue 10 or 11 of the Danny Ketch version of Ghost Rider, he shows up basically exactly as I described him. But obviously I didn't get to sell that book. Dan Brerett and I pitched a mature readers series called Monster Noir that we were going to do as a 4-issue painted book. This was also in the early 90s. And we pitched it to Mark McLaurin when he was still there. And Mark was all for it. He wanted to do it. And it was basically a world where none of the superhero characters existed. It was a Marvel universe that only had the supernatural characters. And it was exactly what it sounds like, Monster Noir, all with all of those great characters. And then Mark McLaurin left Marvel, so that didn't happen. But Tommy, the one that sticks in my mind the most, as soon as Brian mentioned this, the one that came up immediately.
Which one?
Was our pitch for Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, Jesus Christ, I completely forgot that.
This was after the 90s version of Guardians and before the resurrection with Star-Lord. In that interim period, we pitched a Guardians book that was it was the sort of classic Guardians, Right. We added a character called Erica Killraven, who was supposed to be the daughter of Jonathan Raven or whatever. And I always thought it was such a great pitch. It was, the idea was we introduced a new evolution of the Badoon.
Yeah.
Sort of this new evolution of them that they were able to make planetfall. So you could fly a Badoon warship into orbit and drop warriors from airless space. And they could survive to get down.
Their bodies were like turtles, so they could shape themselves into a sphere.
Yeah.
Curl themselves up so they would land, form a crater, and they would come up out of the crater. That was really.
And then basically they would kill everything around them. Because I love those characters, even though they're not the horror characters. I love Charlie 27 and Martin X and all those characters. So that was the other one. That was the one that we we pushed and pushed on that one, but it didn't go. But
you remember the Tiger one that we pushed, that we started?
Yeah, the one that was like Shogun Assassin, you mean?
No, the one where she had the detective agency in the monster part of town. So
I forgot about that.
Hard-boiled detective stories
with
Tiger in her office, drinking the whiskey and the people coming in with cases and stuff like that.
My pull and hold file will be full of all of these books. Just so everything you guys have been talking about, I'd be subscribing at the local comic shop.
Yeah.
Chris, I had a Guardians of the Galaxy pitch too that got rejected. I forgot about that. It was like in the late 80s, and I had Herb Trimpe was going to draw it. He was on board to draw it, and for whatever reason, it's interesting too because in the 80s it was really easy to get things approved. You walked into Shooter's office and said, "I want to do this miniseries." They go, "Okay." For whatever reason, this one did not go over because I love those characters too, the original Guardians of the Galaxy characters, and then Gerber's version as well, But it just didn't fly, and I'm thinking in retrospect, wow, Guardians of the Galaxy with Herb Trimpe, that could have been really cool.
Yeah, it would have been really cool.
I have two, and Chris, you mentioned that you and Tom had used Killraven's Descendant. I had pitched a new version of the Exiles. And it was all these time-lost characters. It was Killraven and the original Deathlock and Skull the Slayer, and they were led by the elf with a gun.
Of course.
Basically they had to go through all the alternate realities and all the timelines and unfuck stuff. And there was a MacGuffin. That one never happened. I was told right away, no, this is ridiculous. No one remembers the elf with a gun except you. Yeah, basically, it was the same thing Cullen was told. You got to include some characters that people will buy. The one that I really thought was going to get greenlit, it's when Warren Simons was my editor, and I was doing stuff for the Max line. I pitched this Khazar miniseries. Khazar and Shauna, they have a child. And it never made sense to me as a parent that you would raise your child in the Savage Land where your baby can be eaten by a dinosaur. So they moved to Paramus, New Jersey. And, Shauna gets a job as a very successful real estate agent. Khazar can't find a job because he has no skills other than killing dinosaurs. So he's sitting on the couch watching Maury all day and slowly losing his hair and getting a pot belly. There was a whole subplot where Zabu is tied up out back and the French poodle next door keeps pissing him off. And
that's now going to be the Disney Plus case.
Right.
Well, it was supposed to be funny, but there was this whole underlying plot where Khazar, I wanted to address the idea of masculinity that we were handed growing up versus, how to more properly teach that to your kids now. And it would have involved his son was getting bullied at school, and Khazar's advice on how to deal with that might not be the best advice, or maybe it is. Maybe there's a gentler way to put it. And I really thought this was going to be it. But then Warren left Marvel, and I was orphaned, and that was it. The pitch died.
I remember you telling me about that years ago. You told me about that. And I honestly do believe it was ahead of its time. I think if you were to have pitched it, if you were pitching it even from a year ago to today, it'd have a better shot even. I think you get traction with it again.
Yeah.
Because I feel like I liked it when you told me about it years ago, but I think it was probably, it was too soon for maybe Marvel at the time.
That's always
I have
been
a suggestion for you, Brian, and I'm only going to ask for 10% in perpetuity. You talked about your Exiles pitch, and they go around unfucking things, and it made me think that it's time for you to just file the serial numbers off that thing and call it the Unfuckers. If you release a comic right now called the Unfuckers, I promise you will make money.
Sorry, guys. I just now wrote a pitch to another editor about that very same title. Sorry. I was just hitting send right before you mentioned it.
Every one of us is going to hop off this call. We're like, hey, if I got a pitch.
I've got a pitch called the Unfucked.
All right. Well, gentlemen, anybody else have anything else to add here on this final episode?
Well, I'll say congratulations to you guys. It's no mean feat. This kind of doing a series like this for as long as you did. It shows some commitment and some love of the medium and love of the Defenders and love of comics. And really, congratulations on it lasting as long as it did. It's amazing.
How long?
152 episodes, which is like the original run of the Defenders.
Yep.
Was that the plan, or did that just happen?
No. We finished the original Defenders run, I think, around episode 50 of the show, maybe. And then we were like, all right, what else can we do? So we did Gargoyle, and then we did Champions, and then we got off into Godzilla and Black Goliath and Ghost Rider teaming up with Jesus Christ and various issues of Marvel 2-1, Man-Thing.
Yep.
And, we would keep going, but the problem is Chris and I are busier than ever. And, as listeners will tell you, there's 3 or 4 weeks in between episodes now. And that's just not fair to the audience or ourselves.
Yeah, it
Well,
feels
the real
like
reason is Brian wants to get back to doing the horror show, so he has.
No. Brian does not.
Brian and I are both divesting ourselves of responsibilities. No, the thing is, like, it's such a pleasure for us to get on together and just go flip through old comics and talk about them, especially when you run across the letters pages and the weird 1970s like Saturday morning cartoon ads in the comics and stuff like that. It's been great, but it has become harder and harder to carve out the time. And once you feel pressure to do it, it takes away a lot of the joy of doing it. And also you feel like you're letting people down when you've got the 3 people who listen to it. You're letting them down because it's been 6 weeks between episodes and a couple times significantly longer than that. So we got to about episode 140 and we had a conversation and I said, Brian, we agreed that we wanted to end it, but I said, let's do 12 more so we can wrap it up at 152 because there's some poetry to that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're right. There's joy in flipping through these old books. I think for me, the takeaway, not only getting to talk comic books every week with one of my best friends, but realizing in rereading some of these stuff that had a major influence on me that I'd completely forgotten about. We talked on the show when we covered Mark's run on the Defenders, Null the Living Darkness. I completely ripped that off for a novel and had no memory of it. I thought, I've come up with this great idea, this sentient darkness. No, you asshole, you read this when you were 15 years old.
Yeah. I mean, and there's no question. Look at my first novel of Fates and Shadows became a 7-book series. And the concepts of hell that I explore in that series definitely have their roots in the Six-Fingered Hand.
Yep.
So you both owe me a lot of money.
Yeah, for sure. So there's no question that this stuff is part of your DNA, and
we all do that. We all do that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And you're talking of these old ads and loving to look at old things reminds me of a podcast I've been threatening to do for the last 2 years, but I don't have the time to do it. And what I wanted to do is with each short episode, take apart and put back together. Excuse me, cut that out. Take apart and put back together a Bullpen Bulletins page, starting with the very first Bullpen Bulletins page, actually starting with the pre-Bullpen Bulletins letters I got from Stan when I joined the Merry Marvel Marching Society that explained what was going on behind the scenes, talk about what each one said and what was really going on while they said things were so nice. And I basically deconstruct each Bullpen Bulletins page, but that's something that, and then I eventually wrote the Bullpen Bulletins page for 2 years. So I learned that, I'm acting as if everything is wonderful and everybody loves each other. Does this mean the old Bullpen Bulletins pages where everybody loved each other, maybe they didn't all love each other? So I thought it would be fun to go over them, but that just, again, that's something I haven't found the time to do. And maybe someday I will, but I just think there is a podcast to be made specifically devoted to the Bullpen Bulletins pages. I don't think anyone's done one yet.
That's a good idea. Yeah,
that's a great idea.
And I'll do it having lived through them, so I basically knew them all. Gee, that wonderful Adam Austin, who had turned out to be Gene Colan, and all the things where they had to lie about what their names were because you weren't allowed to company hop back then, things like that. It'll be a fun thing to do, but you're right, we don't have time to do all the things we want to do. I mean, I've got my own podcast. That episode 173 just went live today as we speak, and trying to write the fiction as well. So none of us can do all the things we want to do in this world.
I just want to recommend before we wrap this segment up. Last night I finished Alex Segura's novel Secret Identity.
I read that. Yeah,
it's really good.
I loved it so much. To our listeners, and
I am in it, by the way. I have an uncredited appearance because when he was researching things that actually happened during the bullpen, I explained how I was almost fired from the Marvel bullpen for hitting Roger Slifer in the face with a hot cherry pie right out of the oven. And there is a one sentence aside where the character who's the protagonist makes some comment about almost getting hit with a piece of flying cherry pie when someone threw a cherry pie at somebody else. But he liked that story so much he put it in there. But there's a longer story for that, but I'll just leave it there. But it's nice to be immortalized in there for the hot cherry pie I smushed into Roger Slifer's face, who then tried to get me fired.
Well, I highly recommend the book.
It's a great book. It's a great book.
It's great, and it has the cherry pie story.
As Scott and you were talking about that, an email from Mike Hawthorne popped up here, and it occurred to me, and it's my fault. We should have had an artist like Mike or somebody else on, because artists pitch things as well. So we didn't do that. But hi, Mike. I know you listen every week. You're one of the three. So all right, well, guys, we really, really, really appreciate it. You guys want to plug what you got coming out? Something that's out now before we let you go? Scott, let's start with you.
All right. Well, the Eating the Fantastic podcast, which sometimes delves into comics. I have people like Larry Lieber and Don McGregor and Jerry Conway and on and on and on. Marv Wolfman has been on the show. So if you go check that out, Eating the Fantastic, it's on iTunes or eatingthefantastic.com. And my fiction, I have a story coming out in Lightspeed magazine and a variety of other places in the coming months.
All right. Tom?
Monthly with Vampirella Strikes, a bunch of other Vampirella stuff cooking, new Young Hellboy that I'm wrapping up the last.
Salt on Castle Death.
Yeah, Salt on Castle Death. Bunch of creator-owned stuff that I can't talk about yet. And
talk about the audio drama.
Yeah, that's kind of, it hasn't been like officially announced, but it's been announced kind of. I'm doing an adaptation of my book with that I wrote with Mike Mignola, Grim Death and Bill the Electrocuted Criminal. They're doing a dramatic podcast, so they're like hiring all these really cool actors and stuff to do that. So I'm wrapping up the last episode of that right now. And yeah,
the last episode of the first season.
First season, yeah. Hoping for a second season, but we'll see.
Cool. Mark, what about you? You're always busy.
Yeah, I got Ben Reilly's Spider-Man. The last issue is out next week, and there's more brewing over there. I've got 5 creator-owned books that should be out before the end of the year. I have a novella that will be out June 21st, so that you can get through a website called Neotext or through Amazon, and a bunch of other stuff floating around as well.
Cool.
Oh, wait, Justice League Infinity Collected Edition coming out beginning of July.
Cool. And Cullen, what about you?
I have a ton of creator-owned stuff that hasn't been announced yet. Aftershock just released the Dark Arc Complete Series hardback, which is a really nice addition to the book. I've got Tales from Harrow County coming out from Dark Horse right now. But really, probably the best way to keep track of all my nonsense is if you can follow me on Twitter. It's just Cullen Bunn. And I've got a newsletter you can subscribe to right there if you want to. But that's where I post most of my news and updates on what's going on.
And I'll tell folks, if you're listening to this, the week that you're listening to this, this weekend, Cullen and I will both be signing in Springfield, Missouri, at a place called Tremendicon. It's a first-year con. Missouri, there's not a lot going on in Missouri, so we thought we'd bring the party there.
That's right. It's first year con. They're very ambitious. They want it to be a convention where aspiring creators and established creators can go and be inspired and learn some new tricks. So I think it's gonna be a fun time.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, guys, we really, really, really appreciate it. Chris, give them a proper Marvel send-off.
Excelsior, true believers.
Okay, so there you have it, Chris.
I don't know what to say, Brian. The best thing about this, not only, it's so funny. So to flash back for people, this podcast came about because, partly because Tom Sniegoski has always teased me for my love of the Defenders. And then I know that you are the one person I know who loves the Defenders even more than I do.
Yep.
And maybe Cullen, and I was one day I was just sitting here at my desk and I just had this whim and I texted you and I said, we should do a reread of the entire run of the Defenders and record it and make it a podcast. And I don't remember exactly what your response was, but it was essentially, I'm in.
Right.
Because it was this excuse for us to just talk about old comics once a week and all the stuff that we were passionate about. And I think it does help that, Tom is 5 years older than we are.
Right.
So it helps that you and I are virtually the same age, and born the same year. So the ads that we run across in these comics hit us the same way at the same time. The stories we read them more or less at the same time. So I think that really helps. But I also, one of the things I value the most about doing this show is how you and I have gotten to be much better friends than we were when we started.
Agreed.
I mean, I like you less, but we're better friends. No, it's, the other thing that's good, I was just talking about you the other day, and one of the things that I said was and you can have Matt cut out parts of this if you want to.
Wait, I feel like I need more of a setup here. Who were you talking?
Hold on, let me say. So I was talking about you the other day to a good friend of ours, and I said that the fascinating thing about Brian is that, and you'll appreciate this because you're an egotist, is that like Neil Gaiman and Arnold Schwarzenegger and certain other figures that you could describe, when you came on the scene as a horror writer, you created your persona. So you came out and you were you basically said, this is who Brian Keene, the author, is, and projected that persona. And it helped you immeasurably in, what's the word? Not centralizing, but it helped you immensely in focusing your fan base.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. No, that's fair.
To be focused, which is fantastic. But what I love about the older Brian is that the older you get, the more you're just nah, screw it. I love yacht rock. Yeah, screw, and that's the most fun of doing this show has been the more we have revealed about ourselves and our childhoods and what we really like and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I would agree. Very much. Yeah, I don't know that I can add to that. You're absolutely right. I will say, and I've only shared this with Mary previously, and I think Rio maybe once when Rio, yours and I were very, very drunk. But author J.F. Gonzalez, Jesus Gonzalez, obviously the best friend I've ever had. And one of the things I missed after he died was just, we would get together and just bullshit about things from our childhood and things we liked. And I really missed that. And you will never know how much you personally have contributed to me finding peace and dealing with that grief, because doing that with you every week on this show, or, when we're hanging out in person, has been a great balm for that. And I may have Matt cut this part out, because that would go against my branding and my persona.
No, but the branding is in the toilet now, Brian. It's done. The branding is in the toilet. You could I think that you do need to, now that Dungeon Master, or whatever his current nom de plume is,
his YouTube name is Firelord HD, and he would like to
now that Firelord has the ambition to become a horror writer, I feel like you might need to delete any history of Defenders dialogue that exists online, because you're being a geek and a doofus with me every week might hurt his brand. But no. I listen. I'm glad to hear. I think also we talked about it. All during COVID. The world is such a dark place. Things are so grim, and to just similar to I mentioned Yacht Rock. I had lunch with our friends Kat and Michael Scully yesterday, and I said, I love all kinds of music. In the last decade, I've gotten, I never expected to get into punk, but I listen to a lot of punk now, right. All kinds of music. But during COVID, something else happened, which is that I discovered the iHeartRadio Yacht Rock radio station.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I'm feeling really anxious, I just put that on, and it's sort of like recording this show.
Absolutely. Sirius XM has a Yacht Rock channel too, and I play that a lot here in my office.
And it is a balm, when you need a little bit of something to give you peace. It's nice to get that. So
absolutely, and we hope that this podcast has served that purpose for you, our listeners. We hope that every week it has brought you a little peace, a little bit of escapism, as the original comic books did. We will not be disappearing from the internet. The podcast remains. Eventually, it will all probably migrate over to YouTube, just because it costs money to keep it up on the other platforms over time. But, it will remain long after Chris and I are gone. 50 years from now, people can go to YouTube and listen to two old guys who are dead talk about comic books from people who are dead.
The greatest honor that we could ever have, Brian, is if 30 years from now somebody does a podcast where they're jointly listening to this podcast and then talking about it. Maybe it'll be Emma Wagner.
Maybe
Hank Wagner's granddaughter.
Yes, it'll be Emma Wagner, and
I don't think her last name is Wagner, but Hank's granddaughter Emma.
And she will have special guests like your daughter Lily and Firelord HD.
Exactly. So, oh my God.
All right. Well, you mentioned Matt before, and Matt, don't cut anything from the show, including Scott Edelman coughing. He requested that you cut that, but no, leave that in. But yeah, Matt Wilderson is the unsung, silent third host of this show. He has been our engineer since the passing of Dave Thomas, for more than half our run. And, he's fantastic at what he does. He makes us sound great every week. And so one last time, if you've enjoyed the show, if we brought you some joy and some entertainment, please, please, please give Matt a little support this week. Go to Amazon.com, type Matt Wilderson, Wildasin in the search bar, and buy one of his books. Or, if you don't have the means to do that, give one of his podcasts a listen. There's Grindcast and there's the Ghostwriters podcast. He runs both of those, and they're available wherever you're listening to Defenders Dialogue.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Brian, my friend. Well, folks, you can find both Brian and I on Twitter and elsewhere on the social media. But for now, we're signing off from Defenders Dialogue. And Brian, we're signing off. I think you should do it.
I should do it?
You should do it.
No, I need to hear you do it, but I will say, always and forever, make mine Marvel.
Make mine Marvel. All right, that's fine. And Scott already said Effendi in this episode. So, All right then. Excelsior, true believers.
God, I just got all the feels from that. All right, folks, take care of each other and keep reading comic books.
Defenders Dialogue. You can listen to this episode and all previous episodes for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play Music, and wherever else podcasts are available. Defenders Dialogue is written and produced by Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Our theme music is by Xander Harris. Our engineer is Matt Wilderson. Check out his books on Amazon.com.